Greetings, and welcome to L.A. Quill. Today we're diving into Chapter 14 of Arianna's tale. Arianna struggled to free herself as Damek forced her up the marble steps. She did not want to go and was making that very clear. These steps led to the palace, and she was desperately trying to avoid entering that place, especially with her captor. It was little more than a gilded prison to her, and she was terrified. The palace itself was certainly gorgeous enough on the outside. There were 4 spires rising from it, and the architecture was very foreign to her naive eyes, but beautiful nonetheless. In the Republic, everything was built with curves, even most of the houses. There was hardly a harsh line to be had in the entire nation. Here in the Empire, everything was harsh, much like the desert climate, and hard lines were simply an expression of that. Still, she found it lovely. What really surprised her was the white marble. She hadn't seen much marble in her time since it was very expensive. That marble was green, as was all marble in the Republic. Arianna hadn't even realized that white marble existed. It reflected the fading light of the day, making the palace itself seem to glow. It was evening now. They had traveled through the desert for 2 days, and it had shocked her. She was used to green fields and forests, not this desolate place. Sand dunes rose and fell as they rode, and it had been more than a little depressing. All she had to look at for 2 days was a mountain in the distance which grew larger as they approached. She had soon realized, after Damek had explained the nature of the Imperial capital, that the mountain itself was Crown City, the capital of the Abital Empire. It covered the mountain and sprawled from it. According to Damek, there was water deep under the mountain, a precious resource in the desert. It was transported to the city using magic, though she couldn't even begin to imagine how that was possible, and his explanations hadn't made any sense to her. The mountain rose from the desert floor like a tower. The palace was at the very top, the crown of the mountain, hence the name of the city. There was a path leading up to the palace that spiraled around the mountain, rising into the clouds. Along this path were the homes of the nobility. Their city homes were immense manors suspended by clouds. Damek had explained that each noble family had a team of mages whose job it was to keep the manors from falling. Quite the task, she had thought at the time, in complete awe of the very idea. She had never seen such things before. She could only imagine the havoc it would create if the mages failed and one of the manors plunged into the city below. Arianna squealed as Damek became weary of her struggles and threw her over his shoulder. He did this gently, but firmly. He had said very little to her on the journey here, and still remained silent. He had been gentle with her due to her condition, but he was getting tired of her resistance, and he'd made that abundantly clear. Good, Arianna thought as she hung upside down. Maybe he'll realize that I'm not worth the trouble and he'll let me go. It was a faint hope, but she needed something to hold on to. If she didn't keep the hope of returning home alive, she would fall into despair, and she knew it. He mounted the marble steps leading to the entrance of the palace quickly, despite her weight slung over his shoulder. She continued to struggle and finally tried to kick him. That earned her a slap on her upraised bottom, bringing another squeal from her. She thought she heard him chuckle at that, but she couldn't be sure since she was beginning to get dizzy and had a faint ringing in her ears. Damek came to the top of the stairs and slowed his pace. Finally, he stopped. "Greetings, father," he said, weary from the road and not bothering to hide it. He felt Arianna still at his words and knew that she feared meeting the Emperor. He smiled and slid her slowly down his body, holding her in the circle of his arms. He turned her around to face his father as Rocken approached. Arianna's eyes widened. This man commanded everything within his sight, and he knew it, and he made sure everyone else did as well. He was dressed all in black and carried a golden scepter topped with a falcon. He wore no crown, but only a fool would think that anyone else was emperor here. He surveyed everything before him with cool disdain, something he had obviously passed on to his son. She drew back a bit, which had the effect of moving her more firmly into Damek's arms. Given the choice, she'd have picked Damek, so she didn't struggle as he stroked her hair. There was just something about this man, Damek's father, that made her extremely nervous. Rocken stopped before them and looked the girl over in every detail. He could see why his son was obsessed with her, even if it wasn't a soul bond that held them together. Her hair was the color of golden wheat, but it was her eyes that held his attention. They were not just green, they were like sparkling emeralds. The purity of their color was startling and held even him enraptured. He had never before seen eyes like that, eyes that truly sparkled from some inner source. He finally tore his gaze from her beautiful eyes and examined her body. She was perfectly proportioned, and her face. She wasn't traditionally beautiful, but there was something about her, something almost ethereal, as if she wasn't a part of this world. Ah, but if I were 20 years younger, Rockin thought before he noticed how Damek held her, as if he was afraid she'd disappear if he let go. He was very possessive of a mere slave girl. Rockin's eyebrows rose as Damek's hand moved from the girl's hair to her flat belly. That one gesture raised the Emperor's suspicions, and those suspicions had nothing to do with a possible soul bond. It would only take a moment to confirm. Rockin looked closer, using his mage sight and opening his senses to her. Sure enough, he felt it. The girl was pregnant. The Emperor smiled as he met his son's eyes. "Welcome home, Damek," he said lightly, saying nothing else. His gaze returned to the girl, his eyes lingering on her well-formed breasts. Seeing the direction of the Emperor's gaze, Arianna crossed her arms over her chest to block his view. Her temper flared and she just couldn't help herself. "Well, at least I know where Damek gets his manners from," she spat. Rockin's eyebrow rose again, and he saw his son's face grow taut. No one, not even his own sister, had ever spoken to him that way, with such a tone of disrespect. He was the Emperor, and all those who came before him trembled at the mere thought of facing his wrath. She was either very brave or very stupid, or maybe it was just the fact that she was pregnant. She trembled just a bit, and he asked her, "Are you a fool, girl? You should fear my very presence." His voice was silky, but had just a trace of menace. Anyone who knew him would recognize that tone. It was when he was at his most dangerous. Arianna wasn't a fool. She was absolutely terrified and wondered where her sense of self-preservation had gone. The thought was still with her when her mouth opened again, seemingly of its own volition, as Damek's grip on her tightened warningly. "I'm not afraid of you." She tossed her head in annoyance, mentally berating herself for the words that were flowing from her mouth. "You're nothing but a—" Damek's hand came up to silence her, cutting off her words. "That's enough," he ground out. If she had finished that thought, she would have signed her own death warrant regardless of the child she carried. He considered gagging her again. Rockin turned and entered the palace, deciding whether to be angry or amused. "Damek, it's your child she carries, is it not?" he asked his son, mind to mind, to keep the conversation from the girl. Damek followed, forcing Arianna along with him. He answered his father in kind. "It is. It's why she's here now. If it weren't for the child, she would be too much trouble to bother with, at least on a long-term basis." "Oh, I don't know," the Emperor responded, his communication laced with amusement. "She's certainly attractive enough to consider suffering through her tantrums. To a point, anyway." "And have we reached that point?" Damek asked, almost hesitantly. He did not relish the idea of having to protect Arianna from his father's wrath. Oh, he'd do it to protect the life of his unborn child, but he didn't want to be forced to go against his father's will. By this time, they had entered the Emperor's study, where the Emperor usually worked and took most of his meetings. The throne room was reserved for ceremonial occasions, and since Rockin hated the place, they rarely used the room unless necessary. Rockin resisted the urge to laugh, his good humor completely restored by his son's uncertainty. The prince had never before been placed in a position where his will might contradict that of his father. It was obvious that the girl meant something to his son, and that something was more than just that she was carrying his child. Damek would go against his father's will if he had to, just to protect the girl. That was certainly an interesting bit of information, and Rockin took note of it for future reference. He waited for a few moments before answering, this time out loud, and he directed it toward the girl. "You're a lucky wench that my son places great value on the child you carry, or I would order your death now. The only thing that saves you is that he would be your advocate." He took a seat behind his desk. "We will attribute your own lack of manners to the babe and the volatile moods of a mother-to-be." He motioned for the two of them to be seated. "And what about your lack of manners?" she snapped, almost flinching at her own inability to keep her tongue caged. Maybe it was the baby. Damek forced her rather roughly to sit, opting for the couch along the wall rather than the chairs before the desk. This way, he hoped he could keep her from saying anything else that might enrage his father, since he would be right next to her. Besides, she was obviously tired, and the couch was more comfortable than the chairs throughout the room. Arianna took the opportunity to gaze around the room. Everything in here spoke of luxury, but it was luxury with a purpose. The chairs were beautifully upholstered, and the desk was a type of wood that she wasn't familiar with. Something that was a dull red in color and similar to the driftwood in a Akana Valley. There were no windows, but the books along the wall more than made up for that. They were just as beautiful as the most expensive tapestry, all leather-bound and perfectly arranged. They were gorgeous to her eyes, and she wished she could have had a chance to read them. She could tell from what titles she could actually read that most of them concerned history or politics. A few she assumed to be magical texts, again from the title. This was obviously a room where work was accomplished. The Emperor chose to ignore her last comment, instead turning the conversation toward the raid on Akana Valley. They discussed the slaves, focusing on when they would arrive and how to distribute them. They wouldn't need all of them and would probably sell at least half at the markets. Since most of the nobility were in need of slaves, they should sell quickly. Damek pointed out that there were several very skilled workers, such as the baker and the soap maker, and they decided to keep them for their own purposes, putting them to work as soon as they arrived. Arianna was disgusted with the conversation. They discussed people like they were commodities to be used or discarded as they saw fit. The Republic didn't have slaves. People were free to make decisions for themselves, not forced into servitude. She would have said something early on in the conversation, but Damek seemed to anticipate her and would squeeze her hand almost to the point of breaking a bone, warning her to stay silent. Eventually, she could stand it no more. Wise or not, she snapped, "You're discussing people like their property." Damek raised an eyebrow at that, surprised she stayed quiet this long. They are, at least here in the Empire. No! No one belongs to another. It's just wrong. She was becoming more than upset, her emotions bordering on hysteria, and both Damek and his father could see that. Damek rubbed her back in an attempt to calm her for the sake of the child, but she was having none of it right now. Is it any more wrong than having people starving each day, including women and children? The Emperor asked softly, wanting her to calm down just a little. It couldn't be good for the baby for Arianna to be so distressed. And since the babe was his first grandchild, well, he wanted to ensure that the mother was healthy. "What are you talking about?" she asked disdainfully. Damek seized on that point, knowing his father had come up with the perfect argument to silence Arianna, if not gain her agreement. Every day, in your own republic, there are people who have no jobs, no homes, and go to bed hungry. Every day there are children who have to steal to survive or starve. Is that any better than being slaves? "But they're free," Arianna declared stubbornly. The prince nodded. "Maybe, but if you asked them, would they trade that freedom for the promise of good food and a warm bed? Our slaves may not be granted much of a choice in their daily lives, but at least they are well fed and have a warm place to sleep. Is either system more perfect than the other?" He shrugged. Perhaps neither nation is perfect. Personally, he felt that the Empire was run more efficiently than the Republic. But then he wasn't a Yarian. Arianna was, and would not take kindly to him if he stated the simple fact that the Empire was better. Arianna fell silent then, considering that for a while. She simply let the conversation drift around her, not really paying attention anymore. She was exhausted, though she would rather have died than admit that. Finally, when she had reached the limits of her endurance, Damek rose, taking her with him. "Excuse me, father. It is getting late, and Arianna needs her rest." She probably would have protested if it hadn't been so true. She barely had strength enough left to rise from the couch. The Emperor nodded. He too had noticed the dark circles under the girl's eyes. "Then, by all means, take your leave." He waved them away, having work to complete before he could retire himself. Damek swung Arianna into his arms despite her squeal. She was exhausted and tended to dawdle, and he wanted to reach his rooms sometime before morning. And that's our tale from L.A. Quill today. If you enjoyed this chapter, let me know your favorite moment in the comments. Until next time, may your stories always be magical.